off. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited you're here to join us for today's session, The Evolution of Solutions Consulting, Identifying the Next Leaders in Your Organization. Please help me in welcoming our panel today. We've got our host, Jack Cochran, General Manager of PreSales Collective, Chris Mabry, VP of Solutions and Partnerships at Reprise, Greg Aldana, VP of Global Solutions Consulting at Appian, and Rachel Tillman, AVP of Solutions Consulting at Arrays. A few housekeeping items before we get started. As Jack just said, please engage in that chat, share your thoughts, share your experiences. But if you have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And also, if you are engaging in the chat, please make sure you've selected it goes to everyone, not just hosts and panelists. On that note, I'm going to send it off to Jack to get us started.
Thank you, Courtney. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for showing up today, and thank you to our panelists as well. I'm really excited for this conversation. This has been a topic that I know when I was leading a team was something that I felt very much on an island for, trying to figure out how to identify leaders within my organization, and then what to do once you feel like you identified them, and how do you know that you've identified the right person for whatever role that might be coming up. And so I want to kick off with just a little bit of you getting to know the panelists a little bit, inviting them to share a little bit of a story about kind of their past related to the topic. I'll set you off. I'll give you the prompt like this. Sorry, I'm treating you like AI, thinking about what's the prompt I'm going to give you. So I feel like this is the direction we're all going here. But here's your prompt. When you think about sort of the SE role today compared to things about, say, 5 years or so ago, what's been the biggest shift, and how does that change what type of leadership you look for on your teams? Chris, I'll start with you.
Oh, thanks, man. It's so awesome to be here. Glad to see everybody on the chat throwing in their links. What immediately comes to mind between 5 years ago and today is just resourcing. And so we were just chatting that 5 years ago, we were like doubling in size with our companies. A lot of SaaS companies had hyper growth at the time, and a lot of that balanced out. Maybe that was 6 years ago. Just time flies. But the way it's changed, what I look for is I look for somebody who is much scrappier, and I think more and basically like hyper resourceful with what they have. That is super impressive to me now. And I don't know if I could have asked myself 5 years ago if that was like one of my top things, I probably would not have said that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we've all had to do that for one reason or another, and definitely I can see that playing over into leadership roles as well. Rachel, love to hear from you. What's sort of your take on the change in the dynamics for SE leaders in the last 5 years?
Yeah, I think that there's been such an evolution in buyer behavior in the last 5 years. Our buyers are becoming more educated. I actually like to explain it and think of it as everyone purchases software now, whether you realize it or not, whereas it used to be a very select group of people. So whether you're signing up to, for a trial of Canva so you can make a yard sale sign, you in your everyday life are purchasing software. And so it's now our job to take and change the education from what it means to buy software for an organization and not just for your individual life. And so there's a very different meet them where they are motion happening in the buyer cycle that I think our solutions consultants who previously were maybe relied on ultra technical skills are also having to really hone in on some of those soft skills.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was trying to think back, how many pieces of software have I actually purchased for myself? Like, how many subscriptions actually have I purchased that I've forgotten about? Hopefully not too many. You're absolutely right. Greg, would love your take as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it like a massive evolution really in pre-sales, I think, over the last 5 years in particular, where there's been a big shift in the skill sets needed, to Rachel's point. But what I'm also seeing as the biggest shift is that I'm also recruiting not just for really great technical skills. I'm looking for leaders that also know how to lead SCs with business skills, like business process consultants. And I'm thinking, and I'm seeing this almost where maybe it was like a 75% split on the skill sets before, 75% technical, maybe only 25% business focused. It's kind of getting at 50-50, and it's really hard to find people that are extremely technically competent and resourceful and can pivot very quickly, but also be very focused and become much more of a business consultant. And it's funny, when I got to Appian, one of the things that that I kind of evangelized to everybody. I said, in a real way, we're going to sell a whole lot more software by talking about the software a whole lot less and talking about the business a whole lot more. And some people get a very puzzled look there. So that to me, that's really been the biggest change in the evolution I've seen.
Yeah. No, no, great call. I definitely more shift to business, different buyers. I mean, that's what I think we've all seen that on just the how we have to sell things as well, but it definitely is impacting leadership as well. Let's kind of start from the beginning. So if we roll back to, all right, the problem of trying to identify future leaders, what do you do when I guess the easy one, when someone says, hey, someone on your team says, hey, I want to be in leadership. What do you do? What's sort of the first bit that you do either working with that person or elsewhere? Rachel, I'll throw this one over to you to start with.
Yeah. So I ask two questions. If someone says I want to be a leader, I ask why. And there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious, like, what is motivating you to be a leader? And Greg will talk more about this, but he has great perspective on, like, is it that you want to be a leader or a manager? But also, what is motivating you to be in that role? Is it that you want a higher title? Is it that you want more pay? Or is it that you want to help people? So the why is super important. And then I have them pull up their calendar and I say, let's look at your calendar and I want you to talk me through what meetings on your calendar right now give you energy and which ones take away your energy. Because as a manager, your one-on-ones are the things that have to give you energy. Your internal meetings have to give you as much energy as some of the external, the customer-facing stuff. And if we're going to take you out of all the stuff that gives you energy and we don't replace it with anything, you're going to be pretty miserable and realize that maybe a true manager role isn't actually what you're looking for, and we need to kind of go back to what type of leadership you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think very few people, I've seen a lot of people move from individual contributor into leadership without thinking, how does that actually change my day-to-day life? It's not more of the same, right? It's not more of the same. Absolutely. Rachel, you mentioned that Greg had something to say about this. Greg, would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I also asked the why questions. Tip of the nod to Simon Sinek, one of my favorite authors. But really, what I always try to talk to people about is like, play the role before you get the role. Because I look at leadership when somebody says I want to get into leadership, I always ask, well, what are you doing about it today? Like leadership is not a business title. It's a set of business behaviors and competencies. And I can put 10 people in a room, and if I leave them there for 4 or 5 hours, I will be able to identify the leader. Leadership is a set of characteristics. It's a set of behaviors. And you don't have to wait to get a leadership position or a management position in order to start demonstrating those. So that way when the position opens up, hey, that person's already displaying those competencies. So I talk to people about what they're doing. But I think probably the most revealing question when somebody says they want to, I want to get into leadership, I want to get into management, I want that. I always ask them, who is the best leader that you've ever worked for and why? And what did you like about them as a leader? And what did you respect about them? It's a very telling, insightful what they think a good leader is somebody who's just nice and give me raises, somebody who gives me that support. It gives you a window on what they consider good leadership. And I also show that back to them, who's the worst leader you ever worked for and why? Because that also gives them, it gives me insight into what they think bad leadership looks like. Was somebody holding me accountable? Things I would consider good things. So it's a very revealing thing. But to me, that's the best leaders that I've ever promoted up from individual contributors. They were already playing that role. They were demonstrating that competencies. And probably the example that I've given most to the SCs here at Appian is I said probably the best example I've ever seen of an individual contributor go to a manager position so fast is because this one individual that I hired, he's one of my first SCs in Asia Pac, he just naturally started demonstrating reusability and scalability. He'd do a great demo and then say, hey, I've repackaged it and trained 10 other SEs on it. And I've set up a webinar and I've done this. And he was just always thinking of how to scale and how to grow things out and how to empower other people. Fundamental things that we look for in great leaders. And he was already playing that role long before he ever got it.
Yeah, I feel like that's critical as well, because I feel like that goes against what I've seen in a lot of organizations I've seen, it's more of, well, whoever is just your top performing individual contributor, well, they're clearly going to be our next leader because they know how to do the role the best. It sounds like that's not what you look for, right, Greg?
No, no. I look for somebody who can inspire, somebody who can lead, somebody who can actually help spot and identify talent, manage up maybe underperformers or manage them out, take high performers and help them get to that next level. There's so many other competencies and characteristics. I always tell people if you when they want to be a manager and they're not, I'm like, well, do you want to be somebody's therapist? Because you're gonna do a lot of listening around people's personal problem. Like you are their family. People put their boss and their leader in a very different category. And so you need to be prepared for that. Because I've seen just the opposite where people have become managers or leaders, and after 6 months, they're like, I don't like this. I want to go back to being the rock star in my account. I don't want to do this other stuff and force multiplier. So I mean, you have to look at what, the characteristics are and making sure that's aligned with what you want to do if you're already doing it. So.
Yeah. Chris, I'd love to get your perspective on this. How do you, kind of taking what Greg was saying, how do you differentiate maybe between that top performer and someone who's a leader?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things I look for immediately is, does this individual live within the rails of their job description tightly? Is that important to them? Or do they already push the boundaries well outside the job description because they see initiatives that change the business that they're interested in moving forward, or they see ways to use their excellence and they see gaps and they're naturally filling those gaps?
Mhm.
And you see this well before they have a conversation with you, before, wanting to become a people manager. Um, it's somebody who, and you can almost see it right away when you start working with them, where you bring them into your organization. You can see them start to plug in these little holes. Or I can see I'm useful here. I can see I'm useful there. Um, and that's like one of those skills that jumps out to me immediately. Now, what I look for when somebody says, "Hey, Chris, I want to," you get the average like, "Hey, I want your job. I want to get into management," and it's like, okay, you can. There's management, leadership, two different things. Um, and the management side, I couldn't agree more with both of you guys. I asked the question why. I ask them about their calendar. I say, "Hey, let's replace all these deals you're winning and the fun feeling you get when you close something, and let's put 7 one-on-ones on that day instead." How does that feel? You know, the thing about, what I think makes a great leader is somebody who's willing to give up that moment of celebration, and they're celebrating their hard work, because you no longer get that. You don't get that feeling anymore, right? It's important to you that you help others get that and succeed.
Yeah, I've definitely seen, I've heard that said before, and I've used that advice myself as well. That's actually the top question that I would ask someone when they asked me, about moving into a management or leadership role. I said, how comfortable are you giving up all the credit for the
Yeah.
work that you're doing to someone else, who's also been working on something? And that's often a very telling response of, well, I still enjoy that credit. Well, okay, but is there a way to shift that? For sure. Um, so as we're thinking about sort of, I'm actually curious from anyone who's watching here. So we've got a good group here. Love seeing stuff going on in the chat, but I'd love to hear. Let me know kind of your history experience. I think this will be important to us going forward in the conversation as well. It's kind of an unofficial poll. Put a one in the chat if you felt like, even if you're a leader today or you're an individual contributor, if you felt like being the top individual contributor was the best way to get to be a leadership, and put a two in there if you had been given this type of conversation beforehand by a leader when you were moving into it. Love to hear from people. One, if you felt like my top IC work is going to get me there, and two, if you were given other direction. Just kind of interested to know from people where you're at as far as kind of where the conversations are at today. I'm seeing a decent mix here.
Direction. What's that? I like that one.
So my guess it's a one then on that one. Yes. So I'm seeing more twos than I expected to see. So it sounds like these conversations are actually happening, which is, I think, very encouraging. Very encouraging to see that at least the current state of pre-sales leadership, people are understanding and telling individual contributors, hey, here's how to get to leadership. It's not just through being the top dog. Um, what so we kind of moving into that, which is definitely good to see. We'd love to know from your perspective the most effective ways that you've seen organizations then support. So when you start to have those conversations, we talked a little bit about asking the why, et cetera. Let's say you have gone through, you've identified someone. What have been the ways that either you've supported or that you've seen organizations support? Okay, this is someone we want to move into leadership. Rachel, would love to hear from you first, sort of on what you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest thing is making sure they have the opportunity to what I call dip their toe in the pool, in a safe and successful way without them totally just being thrown in the deep end. And so we do this through mentorship, through we have rotational programs. We do have a larger org, so there is the opportunity to kind of give people a chance to maybe see another side of the organization or get access or shadow someone. But really those kind of on the job moments. I also I talk to people a lot about the difference between thought leadership and people leadership. So are you interested in thought leadership, which is giving a keynote on the stage, possibly going to be a subject matter expert? Are you interested in product knowledge or deepening your technical, and really eventually maybe being that like field CTO type role? Or are you more interested in people leadership, which is the traditional path of I want to go be a lead, team lead, then a manager, then a director? There's no right or wrong answer, but I like to give people activities, whether it's mentoring an intern or mentoring a new member, helping with onboarding. Those would be things where you get to dip your toe into the people leadership pool versus the thought leadership pool where maybe I have you work with partnerships on an upcoming summit we've never done before or something. So giving you opportunities and then you come back and tell me which one of those really felt like the right fit so that we've really clearly defined what type of leadership it is that you want to go pursue.
Yeah, I love that kind of giving them that choice or the multiple experiences. And I love the circling back afterwards as well. That ongoing conversation I think is very important. Greg, I know you've been doing a lot with some SEs in your organization around this. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what to do after you identify someone.
Yeah, so I mean, part of what we've really tried to do here, since I joined Appian, is really elevate the standing of the SC organization as a whole within the company. And not just within sales and being on par, true partnerships with sales, but really being that central unifying force at the company between sales, marketing, product, services, and all of our partners. And that requires a different level of leadership. So it's not the traditional, hey, I'm going to help my SEs, do really great demos and make sure they're aligned with the, customers' objectives and how to get the technical win, but becoming much more of a well-rounded business leader. So part of this effort that, we've done here at, that we've launched, I'm sure a lot of you read about this SC 2.0, was to really one of the pillars was to set in place a new set of job standards for solutions consulting here, the different levels, associate all the way through principal, but also the different competencies required for leaders. And so we rolled that out this year, and at the different leaders at the manager, senior manager, director, all the way up to AVP, and seeing what all the competencies are that are required, and then giving people supplemental training in these other areas. Very easy and traditional in pre-sales management to give people technical training. But kind of coming more from an MBA background, it's like we need to give these individuals business training. And so it also, I kind of use that as the catalyst to help them also be better SCs and SC managers by getting that well-rounded business training. Because probably one of the things that we're seeing with our customers is not only that they need technical consultation and they need business consultation, but they need organizational change management consultation. In fact, I'm seeing that as the biggest problem that our customers want SC's advice on. Great, here's the technical solution. Great, I can re-engineer my business process. How do I get the people in my organization to accept this new change? And so that's one of the things that we're training a lot of our SC leaders on is organizational change. How do you manage your SCs through this change, through this evolution of connecting with all these different business units? And so they're getting training on that firsthand, and then they're being able to not only be better managers, but then also be better consultants to their customers, saying, I use that a lot as a proof point. When I'm meeting with a CIO who's trying to enact a big change in his organization, I said, well, look what I'm doing here at Appian to enact organizational change. So it kind of melds together in, identifying these competencies at the different levels of management and then making sure your leaders have the right training. We have a lot of SC leaders here at Appian that are using their continuing education budget to go get training at the Wharton School and getting other online trainings and really do that supplemental when they've identified where those gaps are. I need some more training in organizational change management or motivation or some of these other more business focused areas.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love sort of the showcasing that you're doing it actually being a benefit to the organization as well. Right. Absolutely. Chris, I can see you're dying to hop in on this one.
Oh yeah. Hey, I'm fine, man. I'm learning too. I'm taking some notes. I mean, Rachel, to your point, like I love how intentional you are on the questions that you ask back and the programs. I'm you know, I'm more of an apprentice versus reading kind of leader, where I take the apprentice approach and do the tag along, right? I want to Rachel's point, I want to bring somebody into a project and give them the opportunity to succeed. I want them to I don't know, man. I'm old school. I love learning hands-on. I want hands-on keyboard. I want to learn if this is going to work for me. So what I do is I just find small opportunities to bring people in and help make decisions. At Reprise, we do a lot of like leadership dinners, and we do events, many with Pre-Sales Collective. I bring my SCs along with me. I don't need to do this by myself, and I want to give people the opportunity to sit at the table and learn and contribute and add and think. This is the kind of environment I want to be in, right? Specifically, if I'm going to get tactical, I love to give somebody a little decision-making authority into revenue responsibility. So what I mean by this is we have a problem. Say it's a sticky problem that we all have, and we could either throw a tool at it, we could hire another headcount, we could put a process against it. I want somebody to make that decision with me. And I want to look at the budget and say, which call would you make? And if you're an IC, it's always easy to push the business, right? It's always easy to say, we need more people, we need this, we need that. But when you're the one making the decision with the budget in mind, you tend to make different decisions, right? So that's kind of my number one thing is like, let's make a revenue decision or let's make a budgetary decision. And then you know what's going on.
I like that. Give them a little taste of something,
Yeah.
almost give them an at bat, and then kind of maybe follow up. I would assume with some fast coaching there. One thing that I try to do to really help managers kind of excel and I mean, it sounds cliche, lead by example, but I do like to let them ride shotgun and demonstrate some of these different competencies so that they can see firsthand what's working, what's not working. Like I will always share with other leaders my journey as a leader and what I learned from really great leaders. And like I'm just an obsessive student of the game, always watching how people above me are communicating with each other and what they say when they leave the room, and realizing so many leaders have a blind spot and like not make those mistakes and how do people react and almost what not to emulate, and pointing these lessons learned out, the things that I learned along the way. People love that. People seem to really kind of get off on that aspect of seeing, paying attention to what I'm doing, to what the CRO of our company is doing, to what other sales leaders or other people are doing, paying attention to what's working and what's not working. Honestly, I've learned more from bad leaders in some cases than I have from good leaders or people that they just had blind spots. They thought they knew everything. And I think that's probably the core thing that, I've seen in really successful SC leaders in particular, that ability to be self-reflective and pivot, when they have a blind spot, are you coachable? Are you doing these things? So it's interesting to kind of see this evolution.
Yeah, this is great. Um, I do want to also say there's been a lot of good conversation in the chat. I've not been able to catch all of it. Some of you have a lot of great thoughts on here, but if anyone has any questions, we are going to be having a Q&A coming up in about 15 or so minutes. So there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom. Make sure you click on that. Throw your questions in there. We might actually get to some just organically while we're going through, but throw them in there if you have questions so you don't forget them. I'd like to move us into a little bit more of a question that I think is going to have a little bit of I think really interesting takes and conversations. What mistakes we've talked about the good, let's talk about the mistakes. What mistakes have you seen, maybe yourself, maybe companies you've worked with, maybe your companies make around building sort of this leadership pipeline and identifying leaders? Chris, is it okay if I throw this one over to you first?
Oh man, of course. I got just to Greg's point, like I've learned so much more from my own mistakes or from leaders that I didn't enjoy working with. I've got three things for you. So, three things. One is focusing on IC metrics. Two is conflating technical excellence and with the leadership potential. I think that there's an interesting mix there. Three is almost four is the inadequate definition of success in leadership. So if you've not defined what success looks like in your organization, it is really hard to know how to get people there.
Mm.
And there are a lot of comments in the chat on the highest performing ICs getting into leadership or management, let's call it that. That also doesn't end up working out over time. Maybe that's what I call the super SE. So if you're the super SE, it doesn't mean you're a great people manager or that you even want to be a people manager. So those three mistakes, I would say, are key.
Yeah. Rachel, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to the point of like having measurable success metrics, something that I'm really cautious of, but I've seen organizations do is define success by the person that was last in the role or the person that, has done a good job in the role. And I think there's elements of, okay, well, what made them successful? But I've seen often organizations be like, ooh, we need to find another Chris, we need to find another Greg. And I caution against that because I encourage people to bring their own leadership style and their own strengths to the role, which means it will evolve in some way. But if you don't have that underlying, like, what does success look like in that role, you can't actually bring your own strengths to that. You're going to be struggling against that and against someone's preconceived notion of, oh, well, this is what good looks like in the role. And I actually encourage, especially ICs that are looking to go into management, to think about your own strengths and what strengths you would bring, even if you don't see them displayed directly in front of you, because that's okay. Like my leadership style is very much like, what strengths can you bring to the organization that would create some change? If we're trying to fit too many square pegs in a round hole, we're hiring for a very hyper specific type of leader.
Yeah. I feel like that's something that we know really well with our teams, right? We know that if someone, a high-performing SC leaves, we're never going if we try to hire with their exact skill set, we might miss out on what someone new could bring in that new perspective. But we do often forget about that in leadership. That's a great point. Greg, same question over to you. What mistakes have you seen around building leadership pipeline?
I see a lot of companies pivot a little bit more towards longevity. They've been with the company for a long time. They've been in this profession for so long. I think they're just ready for something and not looking at the behaviors, to my original point here. I think the better part is to start identifying people that are demonstrating behaviors in different formats as a way of really developing that talent. I mean, there's a lot of people that will debate, are leaders born or are they made? And I can make an argument either way. I think there's something in the DNA of people that are naturally born into leadership, and you can make a leader into a great leader, into a much better leader. But if somebody's genuinely not interested in leadership and they don't like, you can give them all the training in the world and you can do all that. And I've seen that. Even here, I've seen people that have been in leadership for a few years and like, I just want to go back to being a principal. I've done it for a few years. I know I'm capable of it. I have the competencies, Greg. Not interested. It's not something that I find very motivating. But one of the things that I've seen companies been very good at doing is in terms of, I did this at my last company where think about what is lacking or what you love about your current leader. Like that was always my benchmark. I try to be the leader to my team that I want above me. Like who's the leader that I always want to work for? Like how would I map out what the characteristics and what the things are? What do I wish the people that I work for would demonstrate and provide to me in terms of motivation and support and empathy? And it's a really long list. I wrote an article about it about a year ago when I left. And that's your benchmark, tall order, but I've got to deliver for my people what I expect my leaders to give me. And I've seen just that kind of edict completely transform and help develop other leaders. They're like, well, I hate that my leader doesn't do X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to start doing that. Like like, we don't do anything social. We don't do get these personal get-togethers. We don't do these different things. I'm going to start doing that. And so it's a really interesting way to kind of reframe things to really kind of bring out those unique characteristics. Because if you led that out to all your SE leaders right now, you're going to get a variety of different things. But I love that, like, well, here's what I would love from a leader, so I'm going to display that to my team. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, I definitely, as you're saying that, have felt like I think I remember doing exactly that. Like a lot of the things that I felt like when I move into leadership, I'm going to do these things because I didn't like the way it was done, right? But I think more to Rachel's point, is that really my strengths? Was that my strengths, or was that just me sort of reacting to what I saw happen around me? Rachel, I'd like to come back to you to kind of because one thing that I'm actually curious about, now she mentioned it, um, was sort of around the mistakes that you have seen and made. Um, is there anything that you've specifically, any stories around that, putting you on the spot a little bit, um, around sort of specific mistakes that you've seen either in your organization or elsewhere as well? I'd love to kind of hear from each of you as well, if you have sort of any specific examples.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I mean, we're all in the current macro right now, right? Where we're in kind of a every deal counts. There's a lot of no lose scenarios, like everything feels critical. I do always joke that if everything's important, nothing's important. If everything's critical, nothing's critical. So,
Mhm.
I do try to bring that back down to earth a little bit. But when I look at someone strikes gold and gets success with maybe it's an individual contributor, maybe it's a Solcon AE pair that just crushed and closed $1 million deal. Everybody's like, okay, well now I just need to go be like that. Same thing with leaders, where maybe you have a leader who has, kind of gotten a team through some turmoil or is able to jump in and be that super SC. And so people kind of internalize like, oh, in a moment of stress, like I know that that works. Like I saw them do that and I want to do that. It's a very natural reaction. I think that I encourage people to say, okay, let's take a step back. I don't like making decisions out of a place of fear. I'm like, what if we could take fear off the table and instead we made the best decision for us in this unique situation? So we kind of got to like de-escalate things. Those are the moments where I actually think like that's where I want to see a leader jump in and say, whoa, 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 it's not, we've always done it this way, or this is the exact right way to do it. But what makes sense in this exact scenario? What strengths do we have at the table? And let's use what we've got. I think it actually goes back to something Chris said about resourcefulness. In all of my interviews, I actually test for navigating ambiguity. I look for your ability to, especially in leadership, because I love a good process. I've written a few playbooks, love them. But I also know that leadership is the moment where like the playbook doesn't work. Like anybody can follow the playbook, and I need you to step up and be a leader in the moment that maybe we have to take a left turn that wasn't according to plan. So those are the things that I look for. I think without being too specific. I've seen that happen at Braze. I've seen that happen at previous companies. I've actually even seen it happen outside of solutions consulting. So many, many years ago, my first leadership roles, I ran marketing departments, and very similar. I very much believe, a leader is a leader, no matter what role you're in, whether you're, front line at a restaurant or you're leading a multi-billion dollar company, like those skills are very much the same, and the situations you're going to be in are going to transpire, maybe with a little bit of a different flavor, but you can go learn those leadership skills outside of the pre-sales world very easily.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. I feel like that's a caption we could take. A leader's a leader no matter what role you have. Like I think we tend to forget that when we get so skill specific. I just have to ask the follow-up though, like, so what questions do you how do you test for that dealing with ambiguity? Because I think we all see that as a trait, especially in someone as a leader. How are you testing for that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that you can ask like behavioral questions, right? To understand like what do you do when you don't know the answer to something is like a very basic version of that. But I think to me it's actually the press beyond that. Your ability to actually say, Ooh, okay, well, how'd you get to that or why? Or what's the biggest challenge you've faced recently? I love to ask that question and understand. I'm again talking in an interviewing setting, but when I say what's the biggest challenge you've faced recently, it's so interesting to me whether people go personal, whether they go professional, how big of a challenge, what was the scope of that challenge? I think the more you'll let like someone let people in, us in that, I am also looking for a level of vulnerability, which I think is critical in today's modern leader. So, yes, you can test for it in that setting. The other thing I always do, and this is, again, we're kind of going into interviewing, but I offer to dry run your presentation with you, whether it's, in a panel presentation or a demo that you're going to give to get the job. And in that, I am seeing how you took the prompt, managed it, and managed feedback. And to me, that's giving me a lot of information about what it would be like, how resourceful you are, and what it will be like to actually work with you.
Well, I feel like we could make this a whole separate webinar, so maybe we'll take a note on that.
Good
Kind
in
of come
that.
like this is really interesting, but oh, excuse me, this is really interesting stuff, and I love you sharing a little bit about your process there. Um, but I want to make sure, Greg and Chris, I did promise that you could share any lessons you've learned, specifically the hard reading example. So I don't know if either of you have something you wanted to hop in with.
Yeah, it's funny because now you got my brain thinking about, interview questions and what are things that help you really kind of pick out very exceptional leaders. Um, I always like to ask, what is the most important thing about leadership? Like what is the number one most important characteristic to ask somebody is, it kind of will give you a very eye-opening answer on what their approach is going to be. And I think probably the two things that I look for in really spotting great leaders is if they prioritize trust. I mean, that's always mine. Like that is the number. You can't do anything, with trust, nothing else matters. Without trust, nothing else matters. And people will follow people that they trust. And so I like to dig in, well, what do you do to earn the trust of your team? Whether you've been in a leadership position or not, even if as an individual contributor with your customer, with your counterparts, how do you build trust? And that's always very, very, very revealing, especially when you're bringing somebody into a new position. People are going to be skeptical. If you were one of the ICs and now you're the manager, what are you going to do to build trust amongst that team? And getting very specific examples. And I would say, a fast follow that is inspiration and motivation. And a lot of times, people kind of skip over that. Well, not everybody can be an inspirational, motivational leader. You just manage what they're doing to make sure they do it. I don't know about that. I think, people want to come to work and they want to be inspired and they want to work for somebody who's got a vision about what they want to be part of something special. Especially in pre-sales, I've noticed that. And so I've worked for some leaders that were like that. I've worked for some, they seem more interested in themselves than they do in the vision of what we're doing. And so asking that question at different levels, whether I'm interviewing for an AVP or a director or, a global role, it's very revealing, how people feel about those two areas, about trust and inspiration. And whenever people have nailed those questions and give me very compelling examples, you have a great leader in the making right there.
Yeah, those are great points. I love the emphasis on trust, and I'd absolutely agree with you there. I mean, Chris, the question has morphed, so feel free to take the interview side, the leadership quality side, or the mistakes, right? Where the original, like, what's your take on this?
Oh no, I'll jump right into the mistakes. I've made a thousand of them. So one that sticks out though is calling myself out a little bit is like there was a time where I had somebody on the team that was like showing a lot of leadership qualities and probably would have been a great leader at the time. And we kind of took this route into how do we make you a leader and did a lot of the right things and did a lot of the listening. I'm a super curious person, so I'm listening a lot and I'm looking for signals. But there wasn't a role, and I went a little too hard on promising. Not promising, that's the wrong word, but a little bit too forward in the potential growth of the organization for a new leadership role when it didn't happen. And so I always feel caution now into growing leadership capabilities for leadership's sake, not for management's sake, because the management role you can't control. So sometimes you just have nowhere to go, right? So that was a mistake I made. I don't do that anymore. But it was certainly like bit me. Um, I think the second one is on identifying leadership capabilities in this interview thing. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we were talking. Yeah, it's sort of we started going down the path of sort of tactics to help identify a good qualities of leader within an interview,
Oh
right? Talking
man,
about trust, ability, or
I love the tell me a story when. Tell me about a time when. Tell me about this. That's my entire interview process is tell me a story about when you had to make three decisions. You had three invites on your calendar, and you had to make a decision on which two to cancel, which one to accept. Why did you make
Hmm.
those decisions? Those kind of questions where it's like, tell me a time where you got stuck and how you got out of it. Tell me about your worst demo ever. Caveat, how did you get through that worst demo ever? We've all had huge demo fails, right? The fun part is, yeah, my internet went down and I was in the back of the rental car. And I don't know, when we were doing a lot of on-site demos, you're like in the back of the rental car building your demo environment or whatever. The fun part is how you save the day, right? That's always there too. But I like I like for people to tell me stories because you can learn a lot about somebody when they tell you stories.
yeah, for sure. How they open up, how deep they go, as Rachel was mentioning, like what amount of vulnerability are they open to? Is it a real story or is it something that they practice to make it sound like a real story? You
If
can
the
pick out.
story doesn't include something like I screwed up at this moment, I'm kind of out. You know, like because I'm so transparent on like where I've screwed up in my life and how I've tried to get better and how we're trying to always get better as a team, that when I don't hear that, I'm thinking, oh, just culturally, I don't know if this is gonna work, right? Because we do need I'm in hyper fast environments and stuff. I do need people that feel, to Rachel's point, vulnerable, to feel like they can actually pivot and make that change. Because, uh, you know, when you go from IC to manager or leader, it's like you're on the phone at 7 o'clock on your cell phone talking to somebody on your team who's got a major problem.
Yeah.
You got to figure those things out, right? It's never scripted.
No, and Chris, I'll share that I I consider it the my most important job is to make sure my team knows when I messed up. Like it
Yes.
because if I can't stand in front of them and say, oops, or this was my bad, or this is my responsibility, whether it's in a team setting or individually in one-on-one, I can't expect them to feel safe having that accountability with me. Like they should never feel like they have to hide a bad demo or hide a bad mistake they made. I want to be the first call when something goes wrong so that we can fix it. And that means that, yeah, like, I've had to take a few moments in team meetings and say, whoa, okay, that doesn't feel good. That one's my bad. Let's revisit where that is. I actually consider it the highest compliment. A few weeks ago, a young woman on my team, who's pretty early in her career, put time on my calendar to tell me that something that I said, like rubbed her the wrong way and she interpreted it a certain way. And I was so grateful. I was like celebrating. I was like, amazing. Thank you for telling me. Like I was so proud of her for speaking up and saying like, hey, this upset me. And I was like, okay, here's what I actually meant. I didn't mean it that way. Let's talk about it. I'm gonna apologize. I'm gonna own that. Those are the moments that I feel like I'm like, okay, like I've done an okay job today. And I think that that's really important to demonstrate for my team.
I would agree.
That's amazing. I love that so much.
I, I mean, I really like that because you want to almost model that accountability when things don't go wrong. That's actually, it's funny because at Appian, we have a very structured interview process. And that is in one of our banked questions here about how reflective is somebody on their mistakes and taking accountability. And what do they do? Not just taking accountability, but what do they do to course correct? And I think, it also kind of even speaks to creating that environment for where people are going to grow in their careers and how do you motivate them that they're every year they're not just going to be doing the same thing. Well, if they're not reflective and they're not able to pivot and they're not able to take the accountability, well, this went wrong. Here's how we're going to do this. To me, I love seeing that. And if I pivot back to the making mistakes, when I haven't prioritized that in the hiring process, it's come back to bite me. And I've seen that, and I think we talked before we got on the call. We were all talking about mistakes we made, and the wrong hiring the wrong leader can have a really detrimental impact. And when I look at commonalities where I've hired the wrong leader, sometimes due to experience or just they didn't buy into a paradigm, but it had to do where they were not reflective and they would not take accountability. That's in common with all of those ones where I've made a misstep. So don't underestimate that, everybody. The reflective and accountability, two fundamental characteristics you want to make sure every leader has. So
And guys, what we're talking about here is like we're getting into like culture, right? Which is really hard because some people listening to this are thinking that's not the culture of my company. And I will tell you, this is totally top down. When I'm in executive meetings today, we're always talking about how we can get better. It's extremely transparent. But I've been at others where no, you don't talk about that stuff. What you do is it's like a selling moment where you sell how great your team is doing, then you stop talking, right? And so it really is from the executive level down, this transparency of it's okay to fail, but you have to be hyper corrective. You have to know how to fix things. We have to talk about our failures. One of my favorite lines is you can win alone, but you cannot lose alone. I tell my team this all the time. Go win deals by yourself all the time. That's great. We'll celebrate you. But if you lose a deal and you didn't bring us in, or if you lose something and nobody else was alongside you, that's when the problem starts.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Chris, I'll kind of address, I think I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Maybe Greg, this is going to touch on it, but I also want to say, I've also been at organizations where there's not this top-down level of like, hey, take accountability, say you've made a mistake. Like I've been at the organizations that are a little bit more rigid or possibly not as, forthcoming and vulnerable. One, if you're sitting in your shoes and you're saying like, wow, I wish I was at an organization that was more vulnerable, but I'm not. I still would encourage you to consider like what you can do within your access of control to create a microcosm of vulnerability and accountability and support. Because I do think that I've seen and have been in organizations where, yes, it might not be the top-down mandate, but you can still make an incredible impact in the individuals that you do support by having that orientation.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think part of that, where I don't work in an organization like this, and I've seen that a lot, and I've worked in a lot of organizations that have had different cultures, but I think the best leaders can drive and shape the culture.
Mhm.
And I've seen this. Well, my team's not like that. I'm like, well, what are you doing about it? What are you doing to drive this change? And quite literally, there's somebody who's in my company right now who's in the pre-sales org. She's aspiring to for a manager role, and I'm coaching and I'm mentoring, and we had a great session yesterday. And, we talked about opportunities to demonstrate leadership, almost that play the role. And we've gone through a lot of things that we're trying to get done. And I kind of threw out a lot of red meat, not managerial things, but leadership things like, hey, trying to get the org to do this. I'd like to see more people demonstrate this type of change. And then, we had the conversation of, well, I'd like more public speaking. I'd like this or that. And I'm like, but leadership is also these other things. It's driving this cultural change. If you're driving those things and you're propelling those things and changing the way that the teams actually interact and share and do some of the competencies that we're trying to drive here and some of the new, go-to-market approaches, you're being a leader. That's leadership. It's not management, but you're changing the culture. That is leadership 101. And I just saw this big light bulb go on at that point here. So, I think it's an interesting thing, especially, we started off this whole call talking about how things changed and evolved over those 5 years. Um, I've seen, I saw this at my last company. SEs can really drive and shape the culture of the sales organization as a whole. Don't underestimate the influence that you can actually have on that. So if your company's not like that, real leaders can actually shape and drive that change.
And Greg, I'll jump in on the influence thing because that's actually something we talked about when we were preparing for this. When people are like, "Oh, I'm not in a leadership role. I don't have control over this. I can't show that I can do this." My especially specific to the SC role, is all we have is influence. Like we, especially when it comes to the sales org, like no sales director is reporting to you, no AVP of sales is reporting to you. All you have is influence. So if you're struggling with that as yes, you might not have people reporting to you. You have the same influence as the entire SC org, and that's actually an incredibly powerful leadership skill to hone.
That's a great
And in
point.
some ways, as an IC, you have more influence. And that's a whole different rabbit hole.
I,
But I believe a very influential IC can actually move the business, probably arguably just as much or more than managers.
I I would agree with that, Chris. And
Yeah.
it's just funny. It's funny you brought that comment up, Rachel, because I remember having somebody work for me many, many years ago in a completely different life, and they were, well, I don't have the title. No one will listen to me. I'm like, dude, I can tell you when even when you have the title, people still don't listen to you. You have to
Yeah,
influence and
totally.
motivate people. The title alone is not going to make anyone listen to you. So it's an interesting point. You have to influence change regardless of your title, and that is leadership. So.
I would even double down on that and say, if no one will listen to you as an IC, they're less likely to listen to you as a leader, actually.
100%.
Because, or they'll listen to you because they have to, but that's resentment. Like, so it's that we're not moving the right direction. So find your voice as an IC, in the same way you would need to as well. Like, it gets to the whole building trust as well. There is a question here I do want to address that came in our Q&A. Longer question. Sean specifically asks, and I'll kind of distill this down slightly. If we think about the other way around, as someone who, as I know, there's always a lot of people on here kind of between roles, looking for their next leadership role. If you're looking for a leadership role, you're interviewing at a company, what questions can you ask during that interview to assess the maturity of the leadership organization, what type of culture there is, and if there's that kind of top-down vulnerability like we've been talking about? Whoever wants to start here.
I would ask something along the lines of what is not working right now, and see what they'll tell you about. I want to know. I don't want to know like all the good things, just like what. First of all, I go into interviews thinking, what problem can I solve for your business? That's the whole. That's the whole point of the thing. Okay. So what is the problem, and how deep can they go into the problem, and how vulnerable are they in telling you about their need for you to help them solve that problem? Probably tell you a lot.
I, you know, if I'm going around and I'm interviewing and, I would ask what they consider a high performing pre-sales team to look like to figure out if that's the right environment. Not what it is. I mean, you could always ask, well, how does the pre-sales function operate in your company today? But if I'm interviewing here, what does a high performing pre-sales team look like? Now, I'll be honest, when I interviewed here, there was a very interesting answer I got to that, but then I laid out what my vision was, and the leadership of the company is like, we buy into your vision. But if you're curious, hey, I really want to look for a very progressive, forward-looking, mature, where pre-sales is a much more respected function, coming in earlier, driving more change. Ask them what does that look like in the ultimate? What would you consider the most high-performing team? It's a very revealing question.
I would also ask, how do you make decisions? And when was the last time you guys had a major change? What did that look like? Like, help them walk me through. Did it happen to them? Did it happen with them? Were they part of the change? Um, Especially depending on the level that you're interviewing at, it'll be very telling if you'll have a seat at that table.
Yeah. All great things. We are almost out of time, and I do not want to run out of time without letting everyone from our panel kind of give your final hot takes. We talked about so many things, so take this whatever direction you want. But if you could leave this panel thinking about identifying leaders, doing what you need to do as an individual contributor to start building trust, if you're thinking about that, what will be kind of your final takeaway you want to leave people with? Rachel, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so to build trust, I think you have to show up and be consistent. And I think those are the things that have really made a difference for me. But you also can't just build trust in a silo. You have to build it across the organization. And then, yeah, be willing to admit your mistakes.
Greg.
Yeah, I think in order to build trust, especially when you're coming in new, like I've been here, my current organization, 8 months, and at my previous ones, I inherited a lot of teams where I kind of was the new person. I think the best way to build trust is by example. And so what I like to do is I like to listen very carefully when I first meet a new team and find out what's important for them and what's something that's really important or vital to them that has been dismissed or not championed by somebody else. And then take that as my first thing that I'm going to champion. You told me this was important to you and this was important to the team. I'm going to champion this one effort, or I'm going to champion this one idea. And when people see that, it shows you know how to get stuff done, but two, it shows you're listening, but it also shows that you actually care. And people want to work for people they care. And so, you've got to take that as an opportunity. So I would say if you're looking to build trust, find out, like, even with a customer, with anybody, find out what's important to them and make it important to you. Right? How do you build trust with your family members? If something's important to my kids, I make it important to me, they trust me. So I just take that same approach, and that's been very successful in my career in building trust with different teams.
Thank you, Greg. Chris, your final thoughts.
All right. First piece is, how do we all work for Rachel or Greg? I love everything you've said. Thank you so much. And everybody here is like, okay, I want to work for that kind of leader.
I
Number
am
two.
hiring, so hit me up.
Oh, Rachel's hiring.
So
There
am
you go.
I. So am
And
I.
so is Greg. Oh my God, I didn't do this on purpose. All right.
Hiring. So.
All right. Secondary is, I have this saying that to be interesting, you have to be interested. So tap into your curiosity and be genuinely interested in people, not just the tech and not just all the industry stuff we deal with, but distill this down to being genuinely curious and interested in people and how to help them and what problems they're solving. And this opens up everything. So that is my number one piece. And in leadership, that goes further than anything I've ever tried.
Love it. Well, we are completely out of time. I want to make sure to also thank the sponsor of our webinar, Reprise. So thank you so much to them for partnering with us to bring this wonderful content. Thank you, Greg, Chris, and Rachel, for your time today as well. Please, if you're here and you're not connected with them, reach out to them, continue the conversation. I know they care about this deeply. It's definitely not a show. They definitely care about all this. So, but thank you, everyone, and stay tuned. We'll see you all in the next webinar.